All right, welcome everyone. We are here again with JingXin. And if you didn't meet her last time, please introduce yourself, JingXin.
Hi, I'm JingXin. I am a scientific recruiter and account manager here at Recruitomics, and I build out biotech teams.
Awesome. What are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to be talking about interviewing, the process start to finish. And I have a couple of tips on how to get through your first interviews, whether that's a longer form interview or initial phone screen.
Awesome.
All right. So, in an interviewing process, we start off with a phone screen, which is a 15-minute interview with a recruiter or a member of the team at the company you're interested in. We typically have 15 minutes of time for you to tell us about your experience. So, we really want to use that time as efficiently as possible. Before you go into an interview, it's good to have a strong elevator pitch of your experience. What an interviewer will ask you in the beginning is to give a brief overview of your relevant experience. That is where your elevator pitch comes in. And an elevator pitch is a concise 2 to 3 minute summary of your experience. So, here in a short amount of time, you really want to tell us about yourself. It could be a brief overview of your background at a high level. Tell us about your education. What is your most recent experience? Highlight your areas of expertise. Ideally, your elevator pitch should be tailored to the field, the interview, or maybe even the company you're interested in. For example, let's say you're applying for a bench scientist position. You might want to highlight the scientific expertise you bring to the table. Maybe you're a protein expert or you're a master of analytical method development. So it's something that in 2 or 3 minutes really sells to me what you are an expert in. A good thing to highlight in your elevator pitch as well are pivotal career transitions. If you had any big career changes from one field to another, maybe in that short amount of time, tell us about it. What were you excited about? What did you learn? What are the positives of that career change? Those transitions are really important for us to know about as well. Something you really want to avoid is having a lengthy monologue. As I mentioned, we typically have 15 minutes to cover a lot of information about you during an interview. What you don't want to do is go on for 5, 10 minutes right at the beginning, talking ad nauseum to your interviewer about your experience. We do notice when a candidate talks for a very long time. And I would suggest not doing that in an interview. Something you'll come across with all interviews are questions. Your interviewer may ask you questions that are relevant to your technical experience. They may ask you about a problem you had to solve. My advice is to consider each question carefully before responding. It is okay to listen to a question and take a few seconds to gather your thoughts and then to answer those questions directly. A good idea is to use concrete examples to illustrate problem solving skills. While you're answering these questions, highlighting your skills, you can point out examples of where your expertise came in and provided a solution at the company, or maybe you provided a new strategy or brought something new to the table. Those are really great things to highlight. And what you're really doing when you're answering questions is presenting an opportunity for yourself to be an asset to the organization. You really want to highlight positives about yourself and what a team could benefit from by bringing you on board. I do recommend that before you go into the interview to do a little bit of research about the company. What kind of products does the company develop? What is the size of the company? What is the technical background? Have educated questions ready. You can ask about the team structure, potential direct reports you might have in your role. Definitely show interest in the company and the team's long term goals. If you've done your research, you can ask educated questions about the future direction of the company. You can ask logistical questions that might be relevant to your performance, such as what are on site requirements? What are the day to day responsibilities of the role like? And how can you contribute to that? Post interview follow up. So, congratulations, you've managed to make it to the interview process and now you've finished your interview. So, there's a few post interview follow up steps you definitely want to do. Within 24 hours, you want to send a thank you email to your interviewer. Interviewers always appreciate the time that you've taken but also appreciate when you thank them for their time as well. It shows us that you're polite, you follow up, and you're interested. After the interview, you have an opportunity personally for reflection. You can think about what went well in your interview, think about areas for improvement for future conversations with either recruiters or hiring managers. Something you can also do is reach out to the recruiter and ask if there are potentially areas of improvement. If you can get information on why perhaps you didn't make it to the next round, whether that was how you interviewed or something with your background, keep in contact with your recruiter. It's good to have a point of contact for these sorts of questions to reflect on areas of improvement. Following up with your interview, you have an excellent opportunity to provide any additional information. If you haven't provided your resume already, you can follow up in your thank you note and also provide an updated resume or cover letter for your recruiter to forward to the company of interest. If you haven't heard back a week after your interview, it is fine to reach out via email and follow up. You can stay positive as hiring processes and interviewing processes can take some time. Just reach back out after a week and follow up on your initial interview and express your interest in the company.
Thank you for that overview. Do you mind taking a few questions about said content of this presentation?
Absolutely.
All right. When you are interviewing somebody in a phone screen,
Mhm.
are there any things that really impress you where you get off the call and you are like, that is a candidate I'm excited to submit and they're going to do really well in the interview? What makes us stand out?
I'm always excited about candidates who have done their research on the company. I can always tell when a candidate has read the job description and looked up the company beforehand. So definitely don't ask questions that are like, what do they develop? I'm very impressed by a candidate who has done their research and you ask questions specific to the role, or you ask about what are key problems that you're struggling with right now, or if they offer up solutions. I've had candidates who looked up something on the website and say, I can see that you're working on X, Y, and Z. This is what I've worked on, and this is what my expertise is in. And I think that I can add a lot of value in this area. So they'll present skills or past projects they've worked on that are relevant to the company. That's something I'm very impressed by.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. After you have your phone interview with the recruiter, maybe you have a chance to ask them some questions and you realize that there's an opportunity to highlight some things in your resume that weren't highlighted. It is totally okay to say you'd like to send another resume over. That's something we don't have candidates do enough, in my opinion. Tell me about your thoughts on that and how they can improve.
If you have an updated resume as a recruiter, I love that because I'm trying to advocate for the candidate. I want to present the strongest candidates possible to the hiring managers. If you have an updated resume that highlights your skills in a better way than even a phone interview or your old resume, definitely send that forward. We really appreciate that as recruiters.
Yeah, definitely. So when they're talking to you and you have your really short 15-minute
Mhm.
conversation with them, is there an opportunity for them to ask questions that could help them down the path of making a better resume or cover letter?
Yes, your recruiter is an excellent resource. You can ask either if there's time at the end of a call, or you can always follow up email and ask, are there areas of my resume that I can improve? Are there parts of my interview that could use improvement? Or you don't have to phrase it that way. You can ask, what were some positive things about my resume or my phone screen that really stood out to you? What are some strengths that you see?
Yeah, we like to take some time to help our candidates out, don't we? So, in the process of that phone screen, one question that I would advise candidates to ask to their recruiters is, what are the three top things that if I could do on day one would really make me a strong candidate for this role? And then when your recruiter tells you those things, that's a great opportunity to go back and highlight them very strongly in your resume and cover letter and let the recruiter know that you're going to do that.
That's really excellent advice because something we look for in a candidate relevant to the job description, the first thing I think about is what are the top three skills that we need this candidate to have on day one? And if you ask for the top three skills and have solutions to that, that's going to make a very strong impression on me as a recruiter and make me forward your candidacy very quickly.
Yeah, I've always thought the same. Thank you notes. That's something we don't see very often, unfortunately. How could candidates go about thank you note process? Are you willing to send those along? How does that work?
An email is perfect for a thank you note. You can send an email either to the recruiter or to the hiring manager. If you don't have the hiring manager's email, it is perfectly fine to send a thank you note to the recruiter to forward to the hiring manager. Everyone on the interview team always appreciates a candidate who is gracious and thankful for their time.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't see enough people do the thank you notes, unfortunately. It's sort of a lost art. An email is a great gesture.
Yeah, it just shows that you appreciate our time and consideration. And that little bit of politeness and graciousness goes a long way in making a positive impression.
Absolutely. So when you have this phone interview, and this is a really short interview, when they go onto an on-site or maybe they're going into a hiring manager interview, those are a little bit longer. Tell us about the structure of those interviews and how they should pace themselves.
The hiring manager interview is typically 30 minutes or 45 minutes. So it's 2 to 3 times as long as your phone interview. This is your chance to give more in depth answers than your initial phone screen. So you can talk to the hiring manager, usually with a little bit more depth about projects or your past experience. The hiring manager is more likely to be an expert in your field. This is where it's okay to actually use a little bit more scientific jargon and not talk about things at such a high level. You can go into the details of your projects. You can talk a little bit more about your educational background. Your conversation does not have to be as tailored to a general audience as you would in an initial 15-minute phone interview.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. I think one unique thing about our team and our industry is that our team are scientists. So when we have candidates come through our phone screen process, sometimes we do geek out a little bit and we enjoy getting into the nitty gritty with the science, but that's not typical. Most of the time, when candidates are encountering a recruiter on a phone screen, it is advisable to really have your pitch ready for the level of someone who understands science at more of a surface level.
I would definitely say with a phone interview, describing your background, I like to think of it as if you explained it to a general audience, would they understand? Anyone should understand what you do in a 2 to 3 minute elevator pitch.
Yeah, that's a common mistake that we see. We see candidates launch right into the publications they've done and every experiment that they did, and that's not useful in a 15-minute conversation.
I think an on-site interview is actually a great chance for you to talk about your publications because they're going to be experts in your field by the time you make it to a hiring manager or an on-site interview. That's the opportunity to talk about your publications and really highlight the different projects you finished. Publications show that you're capable of thinking through a project and taking it to completion. So that's a great place to talk about that, to talk about the things you did in your academic background and to ask very specific technical questions. Those are also opportunities to talk about technical skill sets. You have hands on or leadership examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the current formats of phone screens and hiring manager interviews. Before the pandemic, we always did phone screens on the phone. And the hiring managers also had a phone call. But now we're seeing more of a hybrid with video and things like that. Any specific tips that you have for candidates who are going to have a video interview as opposed to a phone interview or an in person interview?
Yes. Nowadays, we do have Zoom video interviews. And my advice would be to treat the video interview the same way you would treat an on site interview. So that means professional dress, making sure your appearance is neat and clean, that your background is tidy and professional. You are representing yourself virtually the same way you would physically on site.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think some people forget that. Finally, when the candidate is moving into an on site interview phase and they might be going in for a marathon of interviews, maybe they're meeting with 8 people all in a row. I've had candidates come back and say that they felt like they were repeating themselves and things like that, but that's expected, right? Because you're meeting 8 different people and you have to communicate your experience. What are some things that candidates should make sure that they do repeat to each person as opposed to things that they might tailor to different members of the team?
I think you should have, similar to your elevator pitch, you should have a general pitch that you Tell each member of the team about your qualifications for the role. Again, it's a chance to sell yourself. And this is a chance where you can keep things a little bit more general. What is the expertise you're bringing to the table and how well you work with others as a team player? So the hiring manager advances you to an on site interview, whether that's with 4 people or 8 people, because they think that you could potentially do the job. And those 8 people don't all have the same background as your hiring manager. This is a chance for them to see how well you fit with the team, both technically and personality wise. So you want to bring your soft skills to the table across every single interview. You want to generally highlight your background. Make sure that every person can understand what you're talking about when you come to each of these individual interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had cases where the interview teams are fairly diverse. So a big general overview that's more accessible to a wide audience. And then you can go deeper depending on who you're interviewing with.
The on-site interview is as much as it is an interview for you. It's a chance for you to interview the team to see how well you might work with them in the future. And you're right, most of the time that's cross-functional. You might be working with junior to more senior members of the team, and you want to make sure that everyone can understand each other no matter the depth of technical expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really worth drilling home that it is okay to practice parts of your interview and go in very polished on certain parts.
I definitely would recommend practicing. An interview is just like public speaking. Oftentimes, whether it's on the phone, virtually, or on site, there's going to be times where it's a one-way conversation. You're presenting yourself. It's public speaking. You should definitely practice your pitches and some of your answers on your background before an interview.
So, switching gears, I have a question that's more perhaps for candidates that have been struggling in their interview process and maybe they're not understanding why. So, that feedback that you mentioned earlier, how many candidates would you say actually reach out to you and ask for feedback on their process?
I would say not enough. Every so often, I get a candidate, and usually they are in later stages who ask, what went wrong? Can I have some feedback? And really, if you can, I would ask at the beginning stages. If you have a phone interview and don't make it to hiring manager review, well, there was something that happened in the first interview that prevented you from moving forward. And your recruiter is usually a great resource to ask where things went wrong. Something else you want to do is maybe have a mock interview if you have an opportunity for that. Have someone give you feedback on positives and negatives of your interviewing experience.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think a lot of times, unfortunately, candidates don't move forward not for anything they did necessarily. Maybe there was a change in the hiring decision, or maybe they didn't have the correct skills. That doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement in the overall interview. So, a mock interview where we're not necessarily talking about any one job or any one company, that's just where you get to polish your overall skills, right?
Right. A mock interview is a great opportunity to practice interpersonal skills, presentation skills, and those can be things such as making eye contact. How are you speaking? We all have a tendency to say, and like, right? So if you have a mock interview, it's a great opportunity to practice your elevator pitch, how you're speaking to someone else. Are you clear in your enunciation? Are you using professional language? Are you maintaining eye contact the entire time?
That's great. One thing that we are doing in our accelerator community is we're doing weekly interview prep Zooms where people get to go around and give their elevator pitch to each other. So it's candidates facilitated by a recruiter going around just getting that practice because sometimes speaking it out loud a few times, an uncomfortable situation in front of some colleagues and peers on a Zoom call, that can be the difference.
As I mentioned, an interview is a little bit like a presentation. So if you wouldn't go into a presentation blind, don't go into an interview blind. Definitely practice.
Absolutely. That's great advice. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Where can people connect with you?
You can connect with me in the Collaboratory community. I'm JingXin Liang. I'm a scientific recruiter and account manager, and I'm very excited to talk to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.